Fund.
This meeting is being recorded.
You just love that. Okay, so first up, Community Support Fund and Women's Shed Fund. So again, Galway City Council, through our local Community Development Committee, LCDC, from here on in, currently inviting applications from community, voluntary groups, organisations and clubs within the Galway City administrative area. And again, both schemes are currently open for online applications only, funded through the Department of Rural and Community Development, again with a sizable total fund allocated to the city of just over 274,000 under the Community Support Fund, and then an additional smaller element of just over 2,700 to the Women's Shed Fund. The exact figures are on the screen there. Again, aim of the fund is to support and enhance community voluntary groups, again, particularly those within disadvantaged areas right across our city. And again, similar to previous iterations, there is a recommendation that we look to support smaller projects and smaller groups. So that's where we refer to the requirement to ring fence funding. So that will be, hopefully, that will happen as we go through towards the end of the process. So we will see grants of up to 1,000 or less being allocated out. Again, applications online only. Both links are there as previously circulated. Closing date, and again, nothing after, so no late applications thereafter. So again, Friday the 27th of January 2013, 4 p.m. Again, in terms of the fund, and again, we'll go into what the fund can and cannot fund. But again, just to note at this stage, the fund will have two elements to it. And when I speak about the fund, I'm speaking about the Community Support Fund. Again, obviously, roughly 50-50. So again, just approximately 50% will go towards what we're going to be calling current funding. So again, that's costs towards energy, running, operating costs of eligible groups. In addition to that, then again, approximately 50% will be of a capital nature. So again, that's what we'll be referring to as our capital funding. And again, that will go towards carrying out necessary repairs and improvements, purchase of small items. Again, to emphasize, we're looking at small scale capital funding. This won't be the fund that will build the extension. This won't be the fund that will totally retrofit your community centre. But again, it is going to be of a small scale capital nature. And then, as we mentioned, in addition to that, a very small amount, albeit very welcome, to go towards funding women's sheds as well. So again, in terms of the fund and what is eligible for funding, so again, in terms of it's supporting not-for-profit community or voluntary groups, again, those that are operating currently in disadvantaged areas in Galway City only. And again, just to pick up and speak further on the running costs, again, there's some examples there in terms of what that could typically cover. And then, like I mentioned, in relation to capital funding, again, we're also looking at, you know, necessary repairs, improvements, and the purchase of items that are needed in terms of supporting your community, getting you back up and running, getting you back into your building. Again, funding is targeted towards facilities, individuals, and those areas that are referenced in our local economic and community plan, LECP, referred to within the documents. And again, the link, again, many of you on the call, I know your names and I know the great work that you do. Many of you are familiar with our LECP, so that's great. For those who are new, again, I would invite you to view it and to try and align your proposed project into the LECP at application stage. In terms of your project then, and within that, there will be, and I suppose this is a non-exhaustive list at this stage. So again, the types of projects or costs that are deemed eligible for funding. Again, development, renovation of community centres. And again, I know I've kind of contradicted myself there saying this isn't the extension, but this is a small scale. This is a small renovation, you know, of a small scale nature. And again, obviously, there may be other sort of projects there in terms of purchasing equipment, a little bit of outdoor streetscaping or landscaping, a small bit of development work that you want to do to your facility. So they very much, I suppose, may guide you if you're looking to put forward a project under the capital side of the fund. On the flip side of that, obviously, oh, sorry, apologies, that's just a continuation then again of what would be eligible for funding. So again, small bits of maintenance. Again, now we're speaking of your utility bills and your operating costs. And again, then to note in relation to your operating and running costs, the eligible period for you to apply for under this fund is from the 1st of April last year up to and including the 31st of March this year. So that is the only applicable eligible, apologies Robert for that big repeat of words, period for the fund. And again, just to note that it's nothing outside of that period. As always, on the flip side, there are also costs or expenditure that is not eligible for funding. So again, pretty obvious, anything that's not in keeping with the ethos of the programme. And obviously then employment, legal, project management fees, feasibility studies, these are not eligible for funding. And indeed, many of your organisations are familiar with not including these. You have been successful in the past. But to any new organisation or to any new group, you're very welcome on here this evening. And again, just to note that these are not deemed eligible for funding. Again, just to speak then to the ring-fenced element for women's sheds. So again, obviously, you may be aware that late last year, the Department of Rural and Community Development have allocated separate funding out to a number of women's sheds that's operating nationally. And as a follow-up to that, they have allocated a separate amount of this fund ring-fenced to fund women's sheds. And again, the funding, as you can imagine, given its limited size from the outset, is only going to be eligible towards the current costs. So again, not of a capital nature under the Women's Shed Fund. So again, it's any assistance with running costs, electric costs, operating costs that may be deemed, that would be eligible under the Women's Shed Fund. Again, if there are women's sheds that you're aware of that are operating in the city, they are also eligible and welcome to apply under the bigger fund. So again, they're eligible to apply also under the bigger fund if that's what they so wish. And again, the online application, it's slightly shorter in nature. So again, that is the link there for the online application for the Women's Shed Fund. So I'm going to just hand you over to my colleague Liam. Slightly different this time round under the fund. To apply, it involves a two-step process. So there's a two-step registration. So there's what we're calling a pre-registration. And Liam is going to take you through a couple of slides just to outline what's involved in that. And then I'm going to come in at the end and then speak about the Community Support Fund. So Liam, over to you.
Thanks, Katrina. I hope everyone can hear me there now.
Yeah.
So I'll just go through quickly the pre-registration, the step one. So this is brought in last year. So some groups and organisations may be registered already. If not, every group and organisation will have to register before they can go on and apply for the Community Sport Fund or the Women's Sheds Fund. So I'll just go through step one there briefly. So it basically is looking for the organisation or the group details. It's not specific to any one funding. So groups are asked to register online with the link there, galwaycity.ie community funding registration. And once groups and organisations register, a unique ID will be sent to the email address used for the registration. So going forward then, that unique ID can be used for all other future grants. So just the questions that they ask in relation to the registration. So briefly, in the section A, they look for the organisation details. So as you can see on the slides there, they look for the name, address, air code of the organisation or the group or the club, the contact details and contact person for any correspondence relating to the grant, the name and address of the organisation, group or club bank account, and the status then of the organisation. So for example, if it's a charity or a registered company, look for details like board of directors, the meetings, so how many meetings, how often do they meet, membership, so if there's any membership fees for being part of the organisation or the club, and then any affiliations to any national bodies. Also then, if the club caters for children, you need to upload a copy of the up-to-date written child protection policy. Must be uploaded in a PDF format if possible on the system. And then it asks for any funding, so to provide details on any funding received from Galway City Council in previous funds. And when entering those figures, the system will only accept whole numbers only. So that's important to note, because if you're putting in cents after the euros, it won't allow you to go on any further. It'll come back as an error. So just put in whole figures only, please. And it's the same then when it's looking for the income and expenditure of the group or the organisation. And along with that, it's a requirement that a statement of accounts or the latest annual accounts submitted to an AGM of an organisation must be uploaded. And then if the organisation is tax registered, you'll also have to upload a copy of your valid tax clearance certificate. It's not necessary if you're a charity, you'll just have to enter your charity number. So then the second part of the pre-registration online, it asks for a brief outline of the activities of the organisation, the group over the past year. So 200 word max just on what the club or organisation has done last year and how they've done it. The next section then is in relation to staff. So if there's any staff organised or any staff employed in the organisation, the group, and then if there is, just to provide a number of staff, and if they're temporary, permanent, full-time, part-time, so on. And then just to note, for any successful groups, the only method of payment of any grant from Galway City Council will be by an electronic funds transfer. So if groups aren't set up already as suppliers with Galway City Council, so if they haven't received any payments before, they will have to do so at that stage, and that requires completing a form for Galway City Council accounts payable team, and also submitting a copy of the bank statement header that you'll get on your bank statement. And also just to note, if any groups may have changed bank accounts there recently with all the changes that were going on with different banks closing, that they'll need to update their bank details with the accounts payable section as well. So to do so, they should, again, they'll have to complete the form and submit a copy of the new bank statement header. So once this process has been done online, an email will be sent to the registered email address that was used with the unique ID. And then that's the number that will be required when you're applying for the Community Sport Fund and the Women's Sheds Fund and any other funding that will come on in the future. So it's important to keep record of that unique ID for your own records. But if you do mislay it, you can contact myself or the community section and we'll be able to retrieve that for you. So that's the first step of the online registration. So it's a bit different to last year. So just make sure that that's done first before you go and try and apply on either of the links there for the Community Sport Fund or the Women's Sheds Fund. because if you don't have the unique ID, you won't be able to complete the application process.
Thank you, Liam. Robert, are we okay?
Yes, I think we're okay at the moment, yeah.
Great, thank you.
For a second, there's a second deaf individual here, and I just want to make sure I have him on screen so he can see what I'm seeing there. Just going to quickly message him there. Yeah, I'll just ask him to switch on his camera there so I can see him on screen. And that should be okay. No. Okay, that's okay.
Okay.
Lovely, cheers.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so now you have your unique ID and we have all of the background organizational information and details that's required. You will then, if you're ready and eligible to apply, you'll then obviously log on to the links for either the Community Support Fund or the Women's Shed Fund and start your online application for your funding. Again, all before Friday, the 27th of January. Again, in terms of the online application, you know, it's detailed, but it is designed, you know, for us to be able to request all of the relevant information that is needed in line with the fund. So again, when you're sitting down to start doing it, I would suggest that you have as much of your information drafted and to hand. You can save a draft and come back to it, but again, just, you know, maybe give yourself one good crack at it and you know, work through it with your drafts and with your supporting documentation. Again, a copy of the guidelines, including the terms and conditions and including all of the questions, are available to view on the link. So again, if you want to get yourself familiar with that, they're all available to view on the links. Again, the deadline, and again, it is online only, Friday the 27th of January at 4 p.m. And again, 2 links there. And as always, any queries, whether they're specific, general, first timers, whatever, please raise them in advance, either to both Liam, who's on the call here, and obviously phone number there, or indeed Emma. Many of you will remember Emma from last year, or indeed obviously email there to c&c@galwaycity.ie. And then I suppose to speak on the programme requirements, because this is very often where we get queries. So I suppose to have these almost to the end. In terms of programme requirements and supporting documentations, again, you must attach and include and upload the supporting documentation with your online application. And again, one of the main documents there that we will speak to at project stage will be your quotation or quotations. And again, this is very much dependent on your project, the cost of your project, and what you're going to request. So again, just to note, and many of you are familiar with this, but just to note that if your total project cost is up to €3,000, then you must include one written estimate or quote. And that must be included at application stage. And that must be clearly addressed to you or your group. And it must also be in date. So sending in something that you got last year, you know, isn't really true market value, not true to date. So again, up to date, current, relatable to your group, your club, your organization. And then obviously, if your project costs from 3,000 up to 25,000, then you must seek a minimum of 3 written quotations, and they must be attached at application stage. And then for all other queries, you can contact Liam, because there will be others, you know, and we can take a couple at the end. We've had a couple already to date, but again, it's, you know, it is very much dependent on your project. But again, that's the general principle that must be applied. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you're applying for funding of a current or an operating cost, again, the bills and that eligible period is from the 1st of April 2022 up to the 31st of March 2023. And again, there, not to labour on these points, but again, if you need permissions, if you need insurance, we will be requesting that from you, and that will be a term and condition if you are successful. Again, as Lee mentioned, funding, anyone successful under the programme, it will only be paid into your bank account, and that's what we refer to as electronic EFT. So again, it's bank account only. And again, depending on the nature of your project, there may be further requirements that must be met. But again, we will step these out for you and your group at offer stage. And again, for this year, we will be requesting that all successful groups and organisations, that one member attends a briefing webinar on that particular point and that particular area, probably around the first week of March. So again, if you are successful, we will be seeing you again on a screen. That time, we'll be focusing in on terms and conditions so that we can be very clear from the outset. Again, acknowledgements of funding, fairly standard for many of you at this stage. And again, match funding is not a requirement under this programme. It is 100% exchequer funding only. So there is no requirement there for a match fund if that's something that you're concerned about. And finally, and again, we will be going through these points in further details with all of our successful applicants post the approvals. But again, key to note is that evidence of expenditure must be retained. It does form part of your drawdown of funding. And again, when we speak about the evidence, again, we're referring to receipts or invoices that are marked paid for the vouched expenditure. Okay, so again, you know, it's and many of you have these good practices in place already. But again, you do need to keep copies of receipts, invoices marked paid, and indeed your bank account details as well. Again, just to note the period there for the operating running costs, again, as advised. And again, in terms of funding, and many of you on the screen are familiar with our funding and our payment procedures. But again, it will be issued in 2 installments. So 50% at your offer stage, and then the final 50% once your project is completed and on a receipt of a short written report, and we'll guide and assist you on that, in addition to photos and again, the very important receipts and invoices for vouched expenditure to be submitted at that stage. Grant funding must be drawn down by the end of August. So again, you have to work with us on that time frame. Final reminder there for the online applications, both links as previously advised. And again, late applications, this is a competitive fund. So again, won't be able to consider anything late. And again, for all queries, please, if not done so already, contact Liam and Emma either by email or their contact details are on the previous slide. I'm going to stop sharing so that I hopefully don't disconnect myself, but that I can come back and see who's there. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. And Rebecca, I might just get you to